God's glory is on tour in the skies, Godcraft on exhibit across the horizon. Madam Day holds classes every morning, Professor Knight lectures each evening. Their words aren't heard, their voices aren't recorded, but their silence fills the earth. Unspoken truth is spoken everywhere. God makes a huge dome for the sun, a superdome. The morning sun's a new husband leaping from his honeymoon bed. The day-breaking sun, an athlete racing to the tape. That's how God's word vaults across the skies from sunrise to sunset, melting ice, scorching deserts, warming hearts to faith. That's Psalm 19 that describes how even the silence of nature speaks of God. Nature is his first book. This is the final podcast in our series, Noticing God. Today we're looking at noticing God in creation and culture. I'm Jules and this is Dchurched.com. Welcome. I was sitting in a packed concert hall listening to the band I had waited 5 years to see. It was a good concert with some of my favorite music. And then something happened. They played a track that soared, that somehow went to another level. And as the final notes of the song finished, there was a moment's pause, and then the roof came off the building. It was deafening. Something had happened and everyone knew. Years later, the band were interviewed and recalled that moment as one of pure transcendence. In moments like that, when you experience an internal gasp, maybe at the breathtaking wonder of what you're hearing, or maybe you see an amazing sunset or view, do you just put it down as something subjective and personal, a trick of the mind or personal taste? While those factors, of course, play a part, might there not be something else going on? Perhaps the original voice of beauty and wonder speaking underneath it all. Romans 1 verse 20 in the Message version says this: the basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created, people have always been able to see what their eyes as such can't see. Eternal power, for instance, and the mystery of his divine being. I think the created order points to something else if we have eyes to see. Whether the creation of the natural world or the sub-creations, as it were, of human culture, God is speaking and has been since the beginning of time. When humans weren't around, his voice was heard in the whisper of trees and the thunder of waterfalls. The first book of divine love wasn't the Bible. It was not written in ink, but in the fabric of life itself. The created order says, I was made by someone. It's within its DNA. How does this work? Imagine a beautiful green meadow with yellow flowers everywhere, warm sunshine, a few bees buzzing, maybe some nice trees and a babbling brook. Through it, of course, we learn about the beauty of God. If God created this, he must be a great artist. I once visited the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and I could only say the power of that waterfall and the scale of it made me in awe of the one who created all things. But it's more than just saying there is life, therefore there is a God. You don't read God's book of creation and then just somehow abstract it into language. Because as soon as we try to describe something beautiful or magical, it loses something of its efficacy, of its wonder and its life. With God's creation language, it can only be encountered and experienced. You can put words to it, but it always loses something. It's like when you have a really good night out and something funny happens and you describe the joke to someone who wasn't there. It's just not funny, is it? And with frustrated tones you say, well, you just had to be there. Some things are lived and can't be described or justified in words. They just are. So this is not to be confused with an argument for God's existence. Creation is, ergo, God. No, that's a long and involved argument. It also has to look at malaria and earthquakes and tornadoes as well as pretty scenery. But this is an argument that says God is there to be noticed if we accept that life is more than the random coming together of particles and matter and energy and time. It is that, but it is so much more. It's the trigger for us to say with the psalmist, I am amazingly and wonderfully made. The heavens declare the glory of God, etc. The response is, if you like, worship, because we sense God's handiwork, and in the parts we can't understand, we respond to the mystery with humility, saying, I am not God. And instead of trying to solve all the puzzling and perplexing questions, we sit within that mystery. Dr. L. Petton says this: the stars are God's fingerprints. The sun is a mere smidgen of his radiance. The moon is to remind us that he doesn't sleep at night. The vastness of space proclaims the infinity of his wisdom, while the sand pebble indicates his thoroughness with the puniest details. The lion hints at his fearlessness, the bear at his power, the hawk at his keen insight, and yet those possess only a tidbit of God's omnipotence and omnipresence. Every tree points towards heaven. Every bird has a song to sing. Even every moment of wind goes in some direction. There is nothing chaotic about our beautiful, designed world. All creation has a message to tell. It says, listen, there is a God. There is a God. As a child, I looked up at the night sky and saw stars as pinpricks of light. As an adult, I thought of them, of course, as balls of burning gas. But what if there is also something else going on? To see the Creator behind them all, or rather to sense the Creator behind them all. This same kind of noticing also applies to human culture and creativity. As image bearers, we are also creative. Have you ever sat under a canopy of stars, maybe in the desert, and just been in awe? Van Gogh's painting Starry Night, in the words of one writer, does this: it gives us fresh eyes for the gift of night. That's what good creativity can do. Culture is what we humans make of creation. So music, film, art, literature can become places where wisdom and truth and beauty are, where indeed glimpses of God are, even in unlikely places in popular culture. If God can speak through a donkey, a burning bush, or a dream in the Old Testament, perhaps he can even speak through the music of a pop diva or your favorite rapper. Some of you might be saying, well, that's a bit much to ask, Julian. But at the very least, movies, for example, can be triggers that help you notice truth and meaning. Maybe some movies that you can think of have struck you like that. But we notice God not just as a matter for discussion and debate, but sometimes by feeling part of the film itself. A person called Craig Detweiler said his spiritual journey began with a Martin Scorsese film called Raging Bull. And he said, there's something was revealed to me, a sense of longing, need and desperation. God chose to use a profane movie to reveal blinding truth to my parched and weary soul. The Spirit spoke through the big screen. Or maybe you've watched some of the Black Mirror series on Netflix, a series of short stories that look at the impact of technology, very often through a very dark lens. Think Tales of the Unexpected, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, that kind of thing, but for the 21st century. Stories with a twist, and at times a dark twist. How do you see God in something like that? Well, I think that in stories that are dark or pessimistic or reflect a bleak worldview, it's like looking at a space where a person was. An empty chair, perhaps, where they always sat, but is now void of their presence. But you know that something is meant to fill that void. You can see the void, you can feel the void, and your very experience of seeing and feeling that negative emotion, as it were, points to the positive. Like seeing that missing knife in the kitchen knife block. You know something is missing. I guess the point is that darkness even itself suggests that there is such a thing as light. And even within dark stories, there is a sense of longing for the dawn. Noticing God requires us to notice Him in the longing that is underneath the story. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology, accurately portrayed aspects of human nature's brokenness. He wasn't trying to and probably wouldn't have called it that. But when you do that, the result is either despair or you recognize the need for a savior. So even art that is dark can point us to God. As the psalmist says, even darkness is light to you. So whether it's art, music, or architecture, or literature, there can be small glimpses. Something that sparks for a moment and then is gone. Something we catch out the corner of our eye, like a deer in the forest that sees us looking at it and bounds away. Develop sensitivity to notice. Similar to my own experience of a concert I mentioned earlier, I was reading of a Bruce Springsteen fan at a concert and how it so moved him. This fan said this: "Only one other public experience in my life even came close to resembling this experience. A Billy Graham crusade I'd attended as a young teen. Springsteen's music and words spoke to me, to some inner longing as much as Billy Graham's had some 40 years earlier. And this was both intriguing and mystifying." What would you have said to that Springsteen fan? Some people who like maths see beauty in the equations or in scientific breakthroughs. I'm a little bit more right-brained than that. I'm more likely to experience moments at a concert. So in all this, recognize that God is at work in His creation and even in human creativity, in art or music. He can be encountered. What I've tried to do in this series is say, let's train our eyes to notice, our ears to hear, our senses to experience and to mark the experience. There is a good little book by Richard Peace from which I took the title for this series. It is called Noticing God. So if you want to go a little bit deeper, I really recommend it to you. Westerners have a worldview that says everything is caused by natural processes and God is out there somewhere, just not here. God has left the building, as it were. Genesis 1 teaches that the earth is the Lord's temple. That's the language that's used in Genesis 1. It's that of a temple dedication. And when the Messiah was promised in the Old Testament, it was all about God coming home to His temple. This is God's world. He pervades it. Of course, He sets up patterns and rules in nature that seem to run automatically, but He is never absent. To view God as absent is in fact a very Western and modern cultural worldview. Training ourselves to notice God is a crucial part of the reshaping of our minds to a new worldview. Sometimes we might go too far and seek God behind every bush, burning or otherwise. But we shouldn't beat around the bush if God is there to be noticed. Go out and spot Him. I'm Jules. This is Dchurched.com. Don't forget to join us on our Facebook page and click like on this podcast. Thanks for listening.